Hey, it's Monday. Thanks for joining me. I want to talk about a topic this week that I think many of us have faced, if not facing. And of course, as we find in our world, the way it is going. And that's the topic of discouragement and or possibly getting into depression. And we certainly do find a setup for us to be discouraged as we think of the restrictions that have been put into place and just the difficulty of visiting family, being with loved ones, and so on. Um, it's a great ingredient for discouragement. And as if we look through Scripture and look in Scripture, and so we find that there are others who suffered through discouragement. It is not something that we as Christians are immune from. It is not something that we don't have to think about facing one day, right? So if we look in, through Scripture, we've got Elijah, for example, one of the characters, of the people in Scripture that faced discouragement. And he got to the place, depressed, really, with everything that had happened. Israel, they hadn't had rain for a great length of time. They were into worshiping other gods. They had a king and queen that were definitely not one to encourage following the God of Israel. And if you remember Mount Carmel, what a great victory. But Elijah came to the place where after the fire came from heaven, God consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stone, the water around it all. And of course, remember, getting water was difficult to find in that day, and that was a precious commodity. Elijah outruns Ahab's chariot, and then Jezebel, of course, wants his head on a platter. And what does he do? He goes off and he says to the Lord, I'm the only one left. Um, Take my life. There's nobody else. And of course, God challenges him and says, Elijah, you're not the only one left. I've got 7,000 that haven't bent the knee to Baal. We've got David, who, after him and his men went and fought, came back to Ziklag. And uh, they came back to their wives gone, their children gone, their livestock gone, possession, everything gone. And these men who were weary, these men who were tired, these men who had fought a battle, and we'll look at some of that this week as we go, fought a battle. They came to a place of grieving. Obviously, their family, their loved ones, their children, everything's gone. And they came to a place of grieving. And in the midst of that grief, they were ready to stone the man who they had just finished fighting beside as they're fleeing from King Saul. These men who are faithful to David. No doubt didn't have to be, but these men were faithful. And so we find they came into great despair. But David encouraged himself in the Lord. I mean, these men who could have just in a moment, David would have been greatly outnumbered. And we find in a moment, David encourages himself and beseeches the Lord, and they have the victory. I'd imagine many others. We don't read about it, but Joseph, imagine sitting in prison for a crime he did not commit, unjustly and unrightly placed there. I imagine he had days of discouragement. Though we don't read about it in Scripture, God has chosen to keep that out, and we find the positive aspects of Joseph. But we've got, no doubt, Abraham and Sarah discouraged with not having a son. And even when they were promised, they were too impatient to wait for God. And so we want to look at that this week. Discouragement, and something that we face and that we can face, and we'll see that, I believe, rise in days to come and months to come. We'll find that on a great rise with, unfortunately, um, many people who will come to a place where it'll be irreversible. But as we look at this aspect, I think we need to, as believers, face it in full reality that this is a possibility, if not a reality, for some of us or many of us to come to a place of discouragement, and great discouragement, place of depression. How do we handle this? How do we face this? What do we do to not be consumed by it? And we want to look at that this week. Thanks for joining me today. We'll see you tomorrow.